So I will go ahead then and introduce our webinar presenter. Erin Wolfe is the Digital Initiatives Librarian here at KU. He's been a great resource for us with BBIP and helping us with webinars and leading really important discussion. And today he's here to discuss metadata. So I'll hand it over. Thanks, Erin.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, hi. So I know some of you and I don't know others of you, but thank you for being here. It's nice to see you all. So I think the original idea of this, let me make sure I'm on all of my, yes, okay. The original idea for this session was to be a sort of a Q&A if you have any specific questions about metadata application or creation or management or anything like that. So I'd like to start with that. If no one has questions or if we have extra time at the end, I have a little software demo that I can run through and that could be useful and interesting to any of you in your projects now or in the future. So I guess I will just pause for a little bit to see if anyone has any questions. You can type in the chat or just unmute if you have anything in particular that you have just if you're curious about or anything like that.
And I'll say too, everyone, I sent Erin your initial proposals when you applied to the program, but I imagine things with your project have evolved and changed since then. So with your questions for Erin, if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on what your project is looking like, that might also help.
If no one else has a question, I have a question. It's not exactly a question, actually. Like if I think back so I started this program in 2019. And so it's been an evolution of like thinking about metadata and how that works and what it is. And I feel there are a lot of things I've come to understand just in this current project that I didn't understand in 2019, not because I wasn't told, but because I just didn't have a framework for thinking about it. Actually, for metadata, it's really it's like such an overarching concept because you have something that could just be a project in itself, right? And then you have like what could be like this project I'm doing right now might have a metadata. Actually, what's it called? The metadata sheet, right? And one thing that I've struggled with from the beginning has to do with audience. Like, what is this data for? Who is it for? How is it being used? Like, what's the practical application? If I look back, like, so in 2019, we were asked to contribute. We were put in categories, right? We were on space and geography, there's biography. And now looking back, it makes total sense to me why those categories were created in that way. But right at the time, I'm just like, okay, that's cool. I'm in this group, but I didn't have an understanding of like, why are these categories being structured in this way, right? Maybe even thinking of, I would be interested if there's a bibliography of like a set of readings of just understanding like the creating of conceptual categories or how libraries work, for example. So like I might know how to use a library better than like an average person walking around, but it seems like there's such depth to it. So now I can be like, oh, it's too bad I wasn't in BBIP 1 right now because I could be really great with helping with those metadata sheets in a way that I was totally a failure at before, right? And then you have metadata like this current project where I'm resistant to it because it's like, why do I need to fill out this sheet? Who's looking at my metadata? And then and I'm actually an anthropologist, I'm getting kind of like, well, is someone gonna, like, I don't want someone to get my metadata or whatever. Like I have weird feelings or emotions about what all that is to do with just thinking of ethics, right? Because the other thing I was thinking about this morning to do with the BBIP novel corporate, oh yeah, the PhiloLogic corpus, right? To think about like, okay, you could have AI that goes through and classifies some of this stuff as well, right? And how would that work or how, anyways, I got off topic. I guess what I'm trying to say is that to me, it seems like you could have like many graduate level courses just on metadata and understanding how that works. And so I guess there's two questions. One is, how do you get that initial entry point into it to be effective? And then two, moving forward, my resistance always goes back to, I'm creating this sheet and who's looking at this sheet? What's the purpose of the sheet? The other valuable thing that we talked about is kind of like the naming of things, right? I guess this is the second question, so I apologize, but like thinking about what you name things has like so much importance down the road, but when I'm originally naming them, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So it's almost like there needs to be that second round. So if I think of the composing process, how do I reduce the number of times of going back and editing, right? So like when I write, I'm not like editing my sentences, because that's going to, for me, come at the end. And so sometimes when I even think about naming, like I name things at the end as a writer. So thinking about the need to name things at the beginning, and what does that mean? Like, this is actually really upsetting to my whole intellectual identity right now, like the conversation itself of being forced to name something in the beginning, and what is the meaning of that? So those are my thoughts, and I hope that a tangible question emerged out of that. Thank you for listening to my feelings.
Sure, that's I mean, those are a lot of really good questions. And so I'll talk a little bit about what I heard you say, and feel free to jump back in if I've misinterpreted or if I missed something that's important. I would actually probably start with that second one, sort of the naming of things, which I heard to mean like sort of the naming of files as you're creating them and as you're collecting them. You know, if you don't work that way, then don't. You can, so I'm thinking of sort of creating a collection of research files. I work with the digital repository for the libraries at KU, and our file names in older systems, they used to have a very sort of structured format where it would be the sort of name of the repository, and then the collection, and then the call number, and then the item number, maybe the box and folder number all in there. But what we do now is that they just have sort of a unique file name so that they're easily identifiable. And then the metadata is kept separately, and you track the file name with the metadata. So as you get to know these images, so say you've got a collection of images, as you get to know them, you fill out the metadata, maybe a spreadsheet or wherever you're collecting your metadata, but the file name can remain the same as long as you can tie it back to. So I've got kind of a bit of a bad habit myself. So I try to keep notes on just about everything, every project, you know, that I'm doing, but I name them all notes, and I rely on sort of the file structure. But if I'm looking for a particular thing, I have to remember, like I have to go to that project. But if I was working with, like I said, with files as part of a digital collection, they're just going to have a unique file name, and the metadata is going to be tracked separately and tied to that. I don't know for sure that answers the question that you had about that part of it.
I think that's very helpful, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then as far as the other one, you know, thinking about audience and who's going to be using this and why are you creating this? I mean, honestly, that's it's a kind of a perpetual question that comes up in librarianship. As a personal example, you know, who's our audience? Well, in theory, it's everybody, but you can't design for everybody, because then you're not really focusing in on anybody. So you have to kind of prioritize who you think is going to use this digital collection. And so for example, and thinking about it from being in the library, our primary audience is KU scholars, faculty and staff and students, and then other researchers and the community. And so it does still grow out, and so you've got multiple audiences, but just, you know, thinking about how to identify. Now I can, I've got down here a note to see if I can find some good readings that might help with that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that that's a common, if not pervasive, issue that I think people deal with in any sort of research that they think is important, because it becomes, you want your work to be important, and it can be so broadly applicable to any number of audiences that it can be hard to scope. But then I also, it sounded like I heard you say you're sort of being protective of your work and your the metadata and the research that you're doing, and so I think, you know, that's another just sort of common thing within scholarship. But I think, sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought now. But in creating, you mentioned metadata sheets, and I'm not quite sure what that is, and I think I have it kind of in the back of my mind as an earlier iteration of what was being done with BBIP metadata, but I think that creating so I'm trying to regroup myself here. So collecting metadata and formatting it in the right way and think about why is that important. Part of it is because in order for your metadata to be usable, it has to be collected and constructed in a systematic manner. And I think that there's some ways that I could show this easily. And I think the webinar, if I remember right, if you saw the webinar on the data set creation, that sort of talks about the reasons for creating metadata in a systematic way and what you can and can't do with it depending on how you treat it initially. So I'm not sure that I got quite to your question. I have a couple notes here that I'm going to follow up on and email you or email Erin, and she can share it with you or the group. But did I talk about that sort of? Did I answer your question adequately to some extent?
Yes, thank you.
If you don't mind, can I just add something to it? Because I think she's referring to the metadata spreadsheet that is distributed through Afro PWW.
Oh.
And that spreadsheet is who's going to see that information that's put on that spreadsheet. It's really the tech team who is constructing the back end of your project so that it is searchable throughout the internet. So that is the reason that they're asking the questions that they're asking, so that if someone puts in into a search engine, the community that you are focusing on, that your publication is going to pop up as one of those links that has some kind of discussion on that particular community. If people are looking at publications done in a certain period, that information would also be in the back end there so that your publication pops up. So that's what the Afro PWW metadata spreadsheet is about.
Actually, that's kind of what I'm talking about. So I used to do lots of jobs as data entry because I'm quick and efficient, right? So like you're entering, like let's say the library system, you're entering through the computer. So that's what I'm not understanding is how do things get from these sheets? You're saying like my sheet, I created my sheet. So instead of entering my own data, I enter in the sheet and there's someone that say then like coding or entering data that's going in so that the computer then can know what's in that spreadsheet.
Yes, and our tech people decided to take this task over because it was taking our scholars too long to do that, and the rapidity of certain things, and that was taking up a lot of the actual time that they had to produce their actual publication. And so that is the reason why our tech team, who the people you trust with your information and data, because they're the ones who are advising you on the building your site and organizing your materials. Anyway, they're the same people. There's not some person off in the distance over in China or Thailand or any place else that is receiving your information.
Yeah.
It is. Go
Okay.
ahead, please.
So it's basically those sheets is just like, instead of me doing the data entry myself, I'm kind of saying, here are the things. And then the person who knows how the system works is entering that. And then I wanted to clarify, I wasn't saying like someone's trying to get my data. I'm saying like, if you look in the archives, like, so in anthropology, if you look back at things in the past, a lot of times like the language in the archives is super like rude, like off-putting, offensive stuff. So I carry with me, because like in my initial like coursework, I carry with me this general fear of what are my words going to turn into like 50 years from now. And so saying what terms I'm entering to cull things has ramifications down the road. So I guess that's what I mean about other people seeing what I'm writing and how it can be interpreted in the future, which is some other issue. But I don't have an issue with like trusting people at Afro PWW taking my spreadsheet.
Okay, so as an anthropologist myself, I understand exactly what you are struggling with as it relates to that, because my work was in the past. I had to often use terminology that was used back in the 1800s, 1900s, which are not a part of my own lexicon in terms of how I speak about people, but I made it clear in my references that this way of referring to people or how people were portrayed in images, etc., was something that is not a part of my own, but it's for understanding, for people to understand. Because if they only see in writing me describing something to them as it relates to an image, right, then they don't get the full impact of, for example, I had to use the covers of some of the songs that were written back in those days. Well, a part of the metadata is a description of what those images are on that cover sheet of those songs. And you can't help but use the title. And the title is offensive. You can't help but use just to show the image, and that's offensive. But that is not being attributed to me. And by the way, if you're concerned about that, any of this, you can put a disclaimer on your site, which publishers before were not willing to do for some of the earlier publications, especially anthropology, where they eliminated the indigenous people's names, etc., out of pictures and only used the researchers' names who were out studying the people. So we can assist you with any of that you are concerned about that might have some kind of negative impact later on. Of course, we can't cover everything because we don't know how society is going to change or what's going to be. In fact, looks like we're going backwards, and some of those things might be appropriately talked about today. But in any case, that I do want you to know that I don't think that you should be concerned that your material is going to be out there and people will be able to take it and crediting it to you and misuse that particular information that you're putting on. We will work with you on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just on that line, I just put in the chat, this is the statement that we use for the Special Collections digital repository, and this appears on every collection and every image, even though most things are not, would fall into this category. There are some materials that could, and so we just have this sort of general statement that's come out for these same sort of reasons. Well, not hearing any, I could move on to talking about a little software demo. Is that, Erin, do you think that's a good time to do that? Okay. So hopefully this will be interesting and useful for you. I'll see what I can do. I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, but share my screen. And so I probably won't be able to see the chat. So just talk over me if anyone has questions or issues or anything. So I'm going to share that.
If you all make sure that you raise your hand, like through the reaction option, that should put your video up and alert Erin also if you have a question.
Thanks, I didn't know that. Are you seeing my screen with an image that's like a sort of a snowy, mountainy sort of thing?
Yep, yes. Looks good.
Okay, good. Okay, so this software is called Tropy. I'll go through it fairly quickly, and I'll put a couple links in the chat. But this is designed by the same organization that made Omeka and Zotero. So they're very, solidly in the academic field. The use case for this that sort of prompted this was for researchers who were doing lots of archival research using and taking photos and digital photos or digital images of archival research. And so this software is created with that in mind to help people organize that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this site. I just wanted to show you, it's just this tropy.org. How do I get to the chat from here? There. Just going to put that in there for your reference. And there's a couple screenshots here, and I'm going to walk through what this software does. So just ignore these. I'm scrolling down to the bottom for a reason, which I'm going to mention later, some plugins. So you have to come here to this site and add the plugins, and I can show you how to do that. But among the things you can do is you can export content from here to Omeka S or to Zotero, and then you can also work directly with CSV files for the metadata side of things. So I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to open, let me go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to open Tropy. This is what it looks like when you open. I don't have a project in here, so I'm just going to name this sample. You can change this later. And so a standard project is going to sort of be keep everything together. So wherever you add files from, it's going to copy. This is actually a brand new feature, but it's going to copy all those files to a new project. So let's say you've got your research photos in a couple different folders on your computer, and you add certain ones to a research project or to this Tropy project to manage them. They'll be actually copied to here, and so then that project folder can be sort of picked up and moved to different places, and everything will sort of stay with it. Advanced is the way that it used to do it, where it wouldn't move any files at all, and everything would sort of stay where it was. So that's just the distinction there. So I'd say leave it at standard. It's probably a lot easier to work with. So I clicked create the project, and it's going to ask me where I want to save it. So I'm just going to save it to my desktop for now because it's just a little test. So this here is what it looks like when you get started. So I'm going to point out that there's 3 sort of panels, and we're going to talk through those briefly. So the left sidebar, so left panel, I'm going to ignore for now. The middle one is where our items are going to appear. And then the right one is where we're going to work with metadata and some other aspects. So the way that it works, and just another disclaimer, I'm going over this really briefly, but anything that I show you how to do something, there's different ways to do it. So I could also come up to the, to the menu up top and do some of the same things. But the easiest way, so I'm going to go, I've got some sample images in a folder, and I'm going to do this. I'm just going to grab a handful of these. These are some album covers of just old LPs, and I'm just going to, I select which ones I want, and I just drag and drop. It brings them in here like this. And the default is, if there's no embedded metadata, it just brings the file name in as the title. So we can see that populated with whatever images I just dragged there. Those all happen to be JPEGs. You can look at it as a list view, and of course you can zoom in and you can view it as a grid format. I'm going to leave it at the list view because you can see some metadata. I'm going to move that out of the way. Okay. And so if I click an image, over here on the right side, you see this metadata popped up. This metadata tab in the upper right corner. Now, I've actually changed the default in the settings so that the default is Dublin Core. It also, the default, if you were to install this yourself, is Tropy generic. which looks like this. So it's got title, creator, date, things like that. But again, it was designed for researchers using archival collections. So it does have some things like box and folder that are not standard Dublin Core items. But just for the purposes of this, I'm going to use Dublin Core. You can add or edit whatever you want. So if I look at the title, this has actually a lot of information in here. The Alex Kaleo Trio, An Evening at the Embers, and then there's a date. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put that date down here, 1954, put the creator as Alex Kaleo Trio. And then for the title, looks like it's An Evening at the Embers, right? And so I've added that here, and you notice here in the middle section, that's been updated to reflect that. And so you can see how that can be useful just to sort of see what you're working with. And again, any metadata that you enter here and you work with in this view, you can export to a CSV for use in other projects. Another thing I just want to show you, let's say rights are, it's not probably, but I'm going to say that the rights are public domain, and I'm going to put the source. Actually, I'm going to switch back over to this Tropy generic just for this argument. So for the archive, let's say I got these from KU Spencer Research Library, and the collection was, I don't know, the LP collection. But then let's say all of these are the same, and you see that I'd have to go in and enter all of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to change this to Tropy archive. I got them all from KU Spencer, and you see that actually popped up because that's already a value that's in here. So now I can just select it. So I type L, we get LP collection. Now I'm just going to click on some different ones, and you see that metadata was applied to all of them. And so that's a nice, easy way that you can start to update. And obviously, I could go in and edit it at any time. So that's sort of metadata part one. I'm going to do something else now, and I'm going to look at the image itself. And this is going to be a little bit more useful later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click. Actually, so I've got this here in the middle. I've got this An Evening at the Embers highlighted. Over here on the right middle, you can see it says one photo, and it still has the file name because I didn't change the file name. I didn't do anything to the file. I'm just working with the metadata up there in the top right. And if I were to click on the photo over here, or to double click here in the middle, what happens, that metadata tab, think of it as sort of like just sliding over, and now we've got a different view here. So we've taken the view that we were looking at with the 3 panels and just sort of slid it over. So now the metadata tab is on the left side, and we've got this image viewer here. And up at the top middle, you can see some sort of just real basic controls, but we can zoom in, and we can move it around so we can see some things. But a thing that's useful here is you can add notes about a given item. And one of the use cases would be for if you were going to transcribe something. So let's say that this is a new I never heard that word before, orthophonic high fidelity recording, because I've copied that sort of from the top of the image here. And the other thing about this, so I'm going to go back a panel, back to that initial view, because I just want to show you something. So that note has appeared on the bottom right, but then also it becomes searchable. So if I start to search for orthopedic or orthophonic, it filters down so you can search by those notes that you're creating. So I'm going to double click on the image again and take me back to that other view. And again, I'm going to show you something else in a minute. So that's sort of the things you can do. You can also it has some real basic image manipulation. You can rotate it, you can flip it backwards. I'm not going to show you this just yet, but there's a few other things you can do. You can change the brightness and contrast, which can be useful, like if you're just interested in the text and the images that you have are kind of on an old yellow paper maybe. And then you can just reset to the original. Anything you do in here, so I could make this look really weird and ugly. This is not happening to the files on my computer. This is just happening here in this view that I'm looking at. So you're not changing anything on your computer. Nothing you do in Tropy is going to mess with your files. So I'm going to go back again because I want to show you another thing. I think we're doing great on time. I'm going to go back to my Finder. Oops, desktop. I get where I want to be. Oh, it's in this weird view. Okay. Okay, so I'm back in the folder where my images were on the desktop. This is just my sample things. So I'm going to grab a PDF here. And I'm going to grab one. I could grab all three, but just for purposes, I'm going to just grab one, drag and drop, and it's come in as a PDF, right? Just as we expected. It's got the file name as the title. If I click on it, I could add things. Public notice. This was a newspaper in Lawrence, Kansas, published by the Merck Co-op grocery store in the 70s. But actually, if you look here, I'm not going to mess with the metadata because we've already sort of touched on that enough for now. But if you look, there's actually 6 photos here on the middle, on the right center panel. That's because there are 6 pages in that PDF. So I can, when I add metadata to the item, it's going to be added to the item. But then there's actually 6 photos. So if I double click over here in the middle, it's going to bring me to this view. And I can actually look at each image individually. And so here's where some of those, let's see, let's get that saturation. So you can see I can mess with these a little bit to make the text a little bit more readable. And I'm going to zoom in using the zoom buttons. But the thing here that's even better, so I've got a PDF with 6 pages. This is a newspaper, lots of stuff on here. Let's say that this J. Hood Books, this is the part that's actually interesting to me of this whole newspaper. I'm going to grab this little square, this little marquee box in the top, and I'm just going to draw a box around it. Now, what you can't see over here on the left, you see we've got this image. You see on the right side of this blue bar, there's a little square that's appeared. I'm going to hit the down button. It says selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom back out to normal. If I click on selection, it's going to go right there to that bit there. And it did lose the color changes because I added them to the image and not to the section, but that's a different thing. And then I can add notes just on this. And let's say I'm not just transcribing, I'm going to say this is an ad for a bookstore, because that's my project is on bookstores or ads or something. And then I can come out, and I've reviewed this whole thing. That's the only one I'm interested in here. Or maybe just for argument's sake, I'm going to add another one to a different page. And then I'm going to go to that selection, and I'm going to say this is an ad for music store. And I could rename this. I thought I could rename it. Yeah, I can rename it just by clicking it, and I could say like prairie music, right? So you can see how this could start to be really useful for gathering some research. Now I'm going to show you one more thing here. In the top left, again, there's our Dublin core. We don't have anything there because I didn't do anything. I didn't add any metadata to this particular item. But if I scroll down, this is for the whole item, the PDF. If I scroll down, I can add metadata specific to the photo. Or if I click on the selection, I can also add metadata specific to the selection. And you can see that they get sort of smaller and smaller things that you can do, but just for tracking different parts of your images, that can be really helpful. So I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna do two more things, and then I'm gonna do one more similar thing with files. And which is just to show you another. So this here, I've called it comic, but what it is it's individual images that are all related. So in the last example, I had a PDF with 6 pages. What this is, looks like it's 24 pages that are all related. I'm going to expand this just a little so I can eyeball it and see that they're sequentially numbered, so I know what order they're supposed to be in. I'm just going to select them all, right click, click merge. Now I've got a single item in my record here. And so the title is The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, volume 36, I guess. And I could do creator and date and any of these other things that I wanted to do. But you can see here in the right middle, we've got this 24 images. So when I click on the item, it brings me to this image viewer, and we can work with it in the same way. You can see we can move around it. I can make selections. I like this one because it's got librarian things. And if I wanted to, can't really zoom out. I made this kind of weird, but I could also, I've made a selection, but I could also, it doesn't show up when I do it, but it does actually make a selection of that selection. So you can kind of, you probably wouldn't want to go into that too often, but you can see how that could be useful when you're working with larger collections of materials. So I'm going to back out. I'm going to just check the chat. So I see Valerie had to leave. Are there any other questions while I'm just going to pause for just a second, then I have a couple other useful things to show you about this.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
So you're saying that this Tropy, then you can take that in Omeka, and it's basically uploading into Omeka all the files and all the metadata from here that you then create your Omeka pulling from that copy that's now been inserted into Omeka?
That's my understanding. So it works with Omeka S, which is, it's a version of Omeka. But yeah, the metadata that you create, again, by default, Omeka S works with Dublin core, so you'd want to make sure you keep that in mind. But yeah, that's my understanding, and it will import your files and any metadata that you create.
And then I keep seeing CSV all the time. So
yes.
That's like something that that's a spreadsheet.
CSV, that's a great question, because a CSV is really important for data management. And let me just pull up something. So I'm just going to pull up a quick spreadsheet here, and this is a CSV file. I've double-clicked the CSV file, it brought it into Excel. Right, so it just looks like a spreadsheet. And I'm going to do the same with this Excel file that I have here. I'm just going to open it up. Got an Excel file, right? They look the same from this view. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open a text editor. This one's called Pulsar, but it's just a plain text editor. And I'm going to open this Excel file, this XLS file, and what you're going to do with this? Nothing, right? This is gibberish because it's a very complex format. But if I open a CSV file in a text editor, oh, that one's, it's only a single column, so let me, CSV stands for comma separated values. And so now in this document, if you see this top URL, comma, libguide, comma, page, comma, LG author, comma, those are that first one's gonna come in as the column headings, and then each of the values underneath here are just separated by a comma, but it's just a plain text document. And so it's really easy for any software to read it and parse it and do anything with it. So that's the difference with a CSV file. You can use your metadata in Excel or any spreadsheet, but when you save them, if you save them as a CSV, let me come back over to, I'm going to open the same file again. So there's my all books CSV. So again, at the top, we've got that URL, libguide page. Excel knows how to read that to separate those into different columns. And when I go to save, you go to save as, and it'll, file name. This one's defaulted to comma separated value because that's what it already was. But usually Excel would say save it as an Excel file. But you just come down here and click save as comma separated values. And it'll save that. And so what will come out of Tropy is a CSV file. So you can certainly open it in Excel. You could open it, and it's this is hard to work with manually if you were trying to work with this in a text editor, but computers can do it very well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That was very informative.
Okay. Okay, closing, not saving, going back to Tropy. So we've got a little bit of time left. So I'm going to show you a couple more things that are going to make this even more useful, which are tags and then lists. So over here in this metadata column, if you'll notice up at the top right, there's tags. Right now there's no tags, but I've got one item selected. This one's called cha-cha-cha together. So I'm going to say the tag is cha-cha. And then I'm also going to say that it's jazz. So if you notice on the left panel now, we've got some columns, cha-cha and jazz. And if I click either of those, it filters down to just that item because there's one tag. But if I click on, I'm going to go back here to our, I clicked on sample at the top to get back to the full list. Let's see, I'm going to select, using the command key to select several things. And let's say these are all blues. And this one is jazz, and that one's jazz. And this one's also kind of, let's say it's jazzy blues. So we'll just say, we'll call those jazz, and I don't know what the heck these are, but let's call these dance music. Right, so you can, and these obviously can be whatever you want them to be. But you can start to filter with these. And you notice they're all green because I think I've got the default set to green, but you can change the tag color to blue, or we can change it to anything. So I'm going to change just a couple. So I changed blues to blue. I'm going to change the dance music to red, and I'll change jazz to purple. And now when I go back to that full list, you can see, if you can see that, that there's, that the little dots there in the middle, that sort of gives you a highlight that there's tags applied, but then also you can see when there's more than one tag applied. And you could use that for anything really. I've got very simple examples, and you can use that for subject terms or genre or source or possible uses for it. And that's kind of how tags work. And then the last thing I want to show you is lists, which right here, it doesn't really show anything. But if I right click over here, I'm going to say new list, and I'm going to say, this is for my article. I'm going to make another new list, and I'm going to say, this is for my website, right? And so what I can do is these are ones, like I'm writing a very thoughtful article about these albums, and I'm going to reference all three of those, but I want to use all of them on my website, but just the albums. I'm not going to put in the newspaper or the comic. Those are just sort of for background research. So now when I click on article, those are here, and I can start to work with just these, and I can, if I want to get more specific metadata on these that I'm going to use for my article, or I could get into making more specific notes just on these particular images. So I'm going to go back, and you can work with metadata and tags from this view as well. So just at the item view here. And so for the website, they're all here. And so any changes I make anywhere in Tropy are going to be applied throughout Tropy. So if I go to Baby Ray Where Soul Lives, and I'm going to change that title to Where Soul Lives, and again I'm looking at this in the list view of things for my website. But when I come back to, you can see it's updated here in the middle. Where Soul Lives, creators, Baby Ray. When I go back to click sample to go back to the full list, the metadata is updated here as well. Again, the metadata just lives here in Tropy. It does not get embedded in the images, but you can export it. And that's sort of the highlights of this. I'm going to go back to Tropy's website real quick, which appears to have gone away. So I'm going to open that back up. And I just wanted to show you, so I scrolled down to the bottom, sorry, I did that really fast. This is the very bottom of the page. Here's the plugins. So here's the export your items to Omeka S. And it gives you, this takes you to a GitHub site. There's some documentation. Tells you how to install it. Download the zip file named Tropy plugin Omeka. Plus a version number from the latest release on GitHub. So what this is saying to go to this link and download the zip file. So I went to that link, and I can see there's that file. It told me I would find Tropy plugin Omeka. I'm going to save that to my desktop. There we go. I'm going to go back to Tropy. I didn't show you the settings. I might take just a minute and show you that too. So we're going to put that plugin on, oh, actually, it came up first. So plugins, we'll keep going with that plugin. I click install plugin. I go to wherever I save that plugin, just click that zip file, and there we go. Now it is here. I can click into enable settings, some API key. More, I clicked on more, sorry, and that took me to here, which is where the documentation of how to use it. So that's kind of how the plugins work. You also need that if you want to export your metadata to a CSV file. It does, exporting to a CSV file does export your notes, but it does not, I believe, at least at the last, they just released a new version this week, actually. As of the last version, it did not export any lists or tags, I think. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that just real quick. I'm sorry, I'm just dumping stuff out there. I hope this is making sense. Feel free to email me with other questions. These are just sort of general settings. Here's where you can change your project name. Templates, this is for metadata. You can make metadata templates, and then vocabularies, these are all different schemas. So you can see, for instance, the Dublin core metadata element set. One thing that's kind of cool about this is you can, I'm not going to right now, but you can very easily, let's say you don't like the label creator, even though you want your content to be valid Dublin core. Let's say you really like the label artist because you're working with all art. Can I just change this? I'm not sure if I can change it without saving it to a copy. But let's see, I just changed that to artist, and let's see if I come back here. Oh, it did. It just updated it. You used to have to make a copy of it. But if you can see there in the middle, that top, it displays as artist. Over here on the right column, it displays as artist, but it still maps to when I export it, it'll still be that DC creator. And I think there was one other thing I wanted to show you, which is the two things I'm going to show you. One thing that's handy, so I did this sort of all at once, so I don't know if it'll show, but if you're sort of building this over days or weeks or months or years, you go to this last import, and it shows you just the last item or items that you imported. So let's say you're starting to build up, you've got several hundred, now it's a little hard to manage or find what you need. You know you just dumped in a whole new folder of things, so you can click on last import, it'll take you there and you can work with it just like the other ways. You can also, when you're exporting, you can export just your lists, just from your lists, I mean. So if I export content from here, it's going to export everything, the entirety of the collection. If I click on the article and export from this view, wherever that button is, up here in the file, export, you'll export just these, 6 here that I'm looking at, along with their metadata. And I could go on with that for longer because there's some other cool things you can do. But one last thing I did want to show you, just in case anyone is considering using it, again, because it's just a really useful thing. I've gone back to the preferences in the project. There's something called a watch folder. And what this is you can select one folder. I believe it's only one. But let's say I'm going to select this PDF as my watch folder. It's going to, yes. So I come here. So the last one on our list here is this KU public notice, but I'm going to go back to my desktop just to show you because it's kind of cool. I'm going to copy this random one. I've set up a watch folder, which was that PDF folder. What that means is anytime I add new content to there, it gets added automatically. So there's that one that I just dropped there. So it's just a real time saver, and depending on what you're working with and all that. There's a lot more that it can do. I'm going to drop one more link in the chat. There. This is a YouTube video that's was conducted by Tropy, a Tropy staff member, and it's called like Tropy for graduate students, but it really walks through a lot of what I did, but then some other details and things like that. So I'm going to stop sharing because it's almost 11:30. I certainly don't want to keep anybody late. Looks like some people had to leave. So that's all I got.
Any last minute questions for Erin before we close it out?
I just want to say thank you, Erin. That was amazing. I wish I had known about this 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, I just learned about it last year, and it's just a fantastic application. It's been around for several years, but it's still being, like I said, they just released an update this week, so it's under active development. I think it's a small team, but they're pretty responsive and like I said, well grounded. And sorry, I just dumped a lot of stuff out there, so hopefully some of it stuck. But yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question? So I've been just using Excel for my metadata.
Mhm.
Could I drop that, could that Excel file be dropped into Tropy?
I believe so. I'm not sharing my screen. You can, there is an import, and I don't remember how to do it right now, but yes, you can import your metadata from an existing spreadsheet. And you might have to make sure the column headers are named correctly. I would say go to that Tropy website and let me see, user guide. At the very top, there's a user guide, and then I'm looking on the left side, which I know I'm not showing my screen. Somewhere in here, there's a way to import that metadata, and I'm not finding it. But I think with 2 minutes of searching, you'll probably find just what you're looking for, and it will tell you how best to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and if it's easier to work with too, you can export your metadata from Tropy and then do some, metadata adding and manipulation, things like that. That might be easier to do in a spreadsheet and then re-import it back in. And that can be, yeah, there's definitely tutorials on how to do that. I put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me with any questions about Tropy or metadata or whatever in general. Always happy to help or talk. Well, that's all I've got, Erin. I'll just tap it back to you for any last minute things.
All right. I mean, just to reiterate what everybody said, thank you so much for leading this and offering new information and elaborating on existing information. I think it's been so useful for everyone. Just going to direct you all to the chat. Erin did put his email in there for you to connect with him if you have questions. Otherwise, thank you for a very fast year in this program, and please know that we are here for you, available to you. If you have questions on the BBIP side, you have my email. Please stay in touch. Continue to use the consulting form on the Moodle site with Afro PWW. Coco, I saw your hand go up. Did you have something?
If you could stay behind just for a second, I have a question for you.
Sure. Yeah. But just want to show our appreciation for you all and how much we've enjoyed having you. And that's all I have.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you, Erin.